Hey, what's up, everybody? Thanks for hopping on board the Inside Job today. And you're watching the Inside Job podcast. My name is Tony. And yeah, I am super excited about this series. It's very near and dear to me. And this particular podcast, I am very excited about. In fact, I think it's got the potential to alter our perspective and the way that we see people and potentially the way that we treat people too. I think it's really important. There's a lot of meat on the bones here for us. So that being said, I'm going to jump right into it. So we're doing a series entitled Afterthoughts. So basically it's just that, right? We are looking at people in the scriptures who in the world's eyes were afterthoughts, underdogs, afterthoughts. And we're seeing how Jesus interacted with them, how he saw them, how he treated them, and the outcome of their interactions, right? And what principles and practices we can allow to rub off and apply into our lives, right? So we're going to dive right into it. This is one of my favorite people in the Bible. And the story is in Luke chapter 7. And it begins in verse number 36. So I'm just going to read it and then we're going to chat about it, okay? Here we go. One of the Pharisees asked Jesus to eat with him. And he went into the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. And behold, a woman of the city who was a sinner, when she learned that Jesus was reclining at the table at the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of ointment, and standing behind him at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears, and wiped them with the hair of her head, and kissed his feet, and anointed them with ointment. Now when the Pharisee who had invited Jesus saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would have known who and what sort of woman this is who is touching him, for she is a sinner. And Jesus answering said to him, Simon, I have something to say to you. And he answered, say it, teacher. Jesus said, a certain moneylender had two debtors. One owed him 500 denarii, the other owed him 50. When they could not pay, he canceled the debt of both of them. Now, which one of them will love him more? Simon answered, the one, I suppose, for whom he canceled the larger debt. Jesus said, you have judged rightly. Then turning to the woman, he said to Simon, do you see this woman? I entered your house and you gave me no water for my feet, but she has wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but from the time I came into your house, she has not ceased to kiss my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with ointment. Therefore, I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But he who is forgiven little, loves little. Wow. That's amazing. Did you hear what I heard there? Did you see what I saw there? All right. From the top. So Jesus is invited to lunch. No doubt, maybe super salad, right? By a Pharisee. And Jesus goes and he has lunch with him. So why is that so significant? Okay. Who were the people that Jesus had the most indignation for? Who were the people that Jesus was most upset with, angry with, that had the most to say to? The Pharisees, right? Because they were hypocrites. They were holding people unto a certain level that they were not keeping. They valued themselves above other people. They looked down on people. They were hung up on their religious heritage and their religiosity. And they were the people he challenged the most and he was most indignant towards. And when invited for lunch, what does Jesus do? He goes. So the bottom line is this. Jesus goes where he is invited. Period. And primarily, Jesus knew that these people were full of themselves, but he also knew that they were created in the image of God. And that in and of itself gave them dignity and value, in spite of being hung up on their religious heritage and looking down upon people, right? So he goes and he sits down at the table and he has lunch with him. The second thing here that we see, there is this woman that enters the narrative, and she barges into the Pharisee's house, and Jesus is reclining at the table. So in the Greco-Roman world, they ate on the floor, and if not on the floor, they ate on a raised table that was raised just a couple of inches, and they leaned back, or they leaned on their sides, and they picked food. So Jesus was leaning, reclining on his side on the floor, and this woman came in and she was standing up. Okay, the Bible never says that she knelt down or got down on her knees. At this point, she's standing up, and her tears are falling from her cheeks onto Jesus' feet. So what does that tell you? You don't have to be a rocket scientist, right? It tells you this. She must have been crying really, really, really hard for her tears to fall from her cheeks 4 feet down and land all over Jesus' feet. She was crying profusely. And then at some point, she's like, I can't leave this guy's feet a mess like this. She gets down and she starts drying his feet with her hair. So in that culture, a woman would only have her hair down for 2 reasons. Number one, if they were not betrothed, if they were not married, it would let people know that they were not married and that they were not betrothed and they were available. And it was also to let people know that you were available for a certain price, if you know where I'm getting at. The fact that this woman is referred to as a sinner, which is no small term in that culture. It is nowadays, right? You're a sinner, 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 sinner. There, it was used for people who were willfully living outside of God's commands. They were willfully living in a way that was in contradiction with God's law, and God's favor and hand was not upon their lives. So it was, if you were called a sinner, it was no small thing. So most likely, this woman was, for lack of a better term, a whore. Okay? I know that sounds so, in your face and abrupt, but most likely she was living in a lifestyle with the hair flowing down that made it known that she was available for a certain price because she was termed a sinner. Okay? So this is what the scene is, right? And then the Pharisee, seeing this, is just appalled. But he's not so much appalled at the woman. He's more appalled at Jesus. He's more appalled that Jesus wouldn't recognize that she was a sinner. Like he said, if this man were truly who he says he was, if he were the man that everybody else says he is, surely he would recognize what kind of woman this is. So the Pharisee was appalled at the scene. He was appalled at the woman, but mostly I think he was appalled at Jesus for not being aware of who this woman was and allowing this to happen. And the next thing that happens is so cool. It's so significant. I love what Jesus does. He turns to Simon and says this. It's awesome. He says, Simon, I have something to say to you. I have something to say to you. So in a way, he's letting it known that not only do I have something for this woman to receive, but I have something for you to realize. And it's time for you to open up your ears. And he tells them this story. He says, a certain moneylender had 2 debtors. One owed him 500 denarii. The other owed him 50. When they could not pay, he canceled he canceled the debt of them both. Now, which of them will love him more? And Simon, being the rocket scientist that he is, said, I suppose the one for whom he canceled the larger debt. And Jesus said, bingo. And then he turned to Simon and said another huge one-liner. He says this. He says, do you see this woman? He doesn't say, do you see this prostitute? He says, do you see this woman? He says, turn and look at her. Stop treating her as though she was invisible, not even there, like the invisible woman. Turn and look at her. do you see this woman? Do you see what I see? A woman who was created in the same image and likeness that you are created in. Do you see this woman in that kind of a perspective? Or do you just see a fallen angel that has made some bad choices and as a result of those choices is suffering some pretty bad consequences? Or so there's a line in a Rich Mullins song called Brothers Keeper. So it's a song called Brothers Keeper, and there's a line in it that I always wondered about, right? So I did some research, and when I found out what Rich meant when he wrote this line, it touched me so deeply. It's so thoughtful, and it made such a difference in the way I view people. And so the line is this, and I'm not going to sing it for you. You'll be happy to hear. It says, "And they saw that she's a fallen angel. I wonder if she recalls when she last flew. There's no point in pointing fingers unless you're pointing to the truth." So he was referring to a woman who has made some bad choices in life and is suffering some nasty consequences as a result. Okay, a woman who's living her life in crisis, who the world now sees and identifies as a fallen angel. And then he says, I wonder if she remember when she last flew. I wonder if she remember when she wasn't looked upon as that kind of a person, when she wasn't identified as an afterthought, as a train wreck, as a whore. I wonder if she remembers when she played kickball in recess in the 3rd grade, or when she went out to hunt for butterflies when she was 9 years old, right? I wonder if she remembers that part of who she is. I wonder if I wonder now if the only thing that she can see herself as is the way that other people view her as this fallen angel. And I think that's what he's saying to Simon. He says, look at this woman. Do you see what I see? And I think context is so important. There's a wonderful, like a little story, right? A context story about a newlywed couple who just bought a house, and they're sitting at the kitchen table and they're having breakfast. And their neighbor is hanging up their clothes on the clothesline. And the wife looks out the window and she's like, oh, would you look at those clothes? They're filthy. How can she be hanging them up on the clothesline? The next week, the same thing. They're having breakfast at the kitchen table and the wife looks through the window and the neighbor's hanging up clothes on the clothesline and they're filthy. And she's says to the husband, what's she, out of her mind? Why would she hang up dirty clothes? The next week, the same thing, and she looks out the window and the neighbor is hanging up clothes. This time, they're sparkling clean, they're pristine, they're bright. And she turns to the husband and goes, wow, she must have got some new laundry detergent. Would you look at those clothes? They're super bright. And the husband goes to her, hon, I got something to tell you. I got up an hour early and I washed the windows. Context is key in whether we value people or not, whether we see people as fallen angels or created with value in the same likeness and image that we were created in. And that's what he's saying to Simon, okay? And then he closes like a Mariano Rivera, right, with a 95-mile-an-hour fastball. And he closes and he says to the woman, he says, your sins are forgiven. And what's most notable about that is that she didn't come for forgiveness, right? That's not what she didn't even ask for it. And Jesus says, you got what you didn't even ask for because I know where your heart is. That's amazing to me. Amazing to me, And so this whole thing, it might have been a setup, knowing that in the economy of the grace of God, not only did Jesus have something for this woman to receive, forgiveness that would alter the change, that would alter the course of her life, but he also had something for the Pharisee to recognize and to realize that could also alter the trajectory of his life. and can alter ours if we allow it to. So, anyways, thanks for hopping on board. Next week, you're not going to want to miss it. I have a juicy story. I love this guy. I think that there's so much to glean from, and I'm super excited. So until then, have a great week. I'll see you then.